And hello, friends. We welcome you to another episode of Chapters here on Armstrong Television. Chapters is the show that profiles authors, editors, and publishers in West Virginia, Ohio, and Kentucky. I'm Elliot Parker, and it's great to have you with us. We are pleased to have West Virginia writer and Parkersburg resident Don Stansberry with us today, award-winning author Don Stansberry with us today, to talk to us about his fiction books and his children's books here on the program. And Don Stansberry joins us. He is a native West Virginian. He's an elementary school teacher. He's the author of 2 middle school books, Enki and the Missing Gold, and Enki, Ogilby, and the Witches, and his children's book, Crusty, which was named a finalist in the USA News Best Book Awards. He's been a public school teacher since 1984 and has always had an interest in writing. He was at one time the head coach for the Parkersburg High girls basketball team for 16 years, and he retired from this position with 4 state championships. He lives in West Virginia with his wife, Patty, and his 2 daughters, Shay and Sydney, and we're here to talk to him today about those works, as well as his 2 novels, Secret Blood, and his most recent book, Vulture Bend. And so we'd like to welcome Don Stansberry with us and to the program. Here's Don. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, I appreciate the offer to come down. This is a great place. I've never been here before.
Oh, well, welcome.
And in Parkersburg, we don't have a bookstore like this. We have the mall bookstore, but nothing with, character like this place.
Oh, well, great. Well, welcome. Glad to have you here. Appreciate you coming to Huntington for to be on the program with us today. So I wanted to ask you first, I thought we'd start first talking about your newest book, Vulture Bend. And this came out at the time of our taping. It's only been out, a week or 10 days or a little over 2 weeks. So tell us a little bit about Vulture Bend. What's the storyline? What's involved there with that book?
Well, it's the main character is the classic underachiever. He's good looking, he's smart, but he really lacks drive. So he doesn't really care about anything until he meets another young teacher. He's doing his student teaching. She's filling in as a substitute. So he falls head over heels for her. And there's a serial killer involved. And by the end of the book, there's a whole bevy of ghosts. So it's kind of an up and down. I wanted to do a horror romance, which is kind of like Stephen King meets Nicholas Sparks. So, it's hard to do horror without being corny, and it's hard to do romance without being cheesy. So I worked real hard on trying not to make it real flimsy. I tried to develop the characters in that.
So where did the idea for this come from? You mentioned it was kind of a blend of Stephen King and Nicholas Sparks. Where did your idea for the plot, for these characters, where did all of it come from?
I had a really strong neighborhood growing up. There were about 16 kids within 4 houses. And summertime was the time to, we stayed out till late, and we were always right there in the neighborhood within the few houses. But there was always a ghost story or a ghost somewhere that we were interested in. We would stay out and watch the old Chiller Theater movies and the old black and white things, and somebody would bring their TV out to the porch, and all the kids would be out there till midnight. So I kind of had the feel for that, for ghosts and that creepy dampness that that climbs in at night, and then the romance part just kind of fell into place. It kind of brought the characters together.
Very good. I wanted to ask you too. We'll talk about your children's books here in just a second. What is that like for you as a writer to kind of go between those 2 genres or those 2 age groups, to sort of write adult fiction and then sort of step away and do children's books and middle grade novels? What is that? What are some of the challenges that present you as a writer, sort of shifting in those genres there?
That has been it is kind of difficult, especially when I teach for 8 hours and then I go 2 hours to the library to work every night. So it's kind of even with the Secret Blood, which is not this book, but and the other mainstream novel, there's not a whole lot of violence. There's no cussing. There's no love scenes in those. So it wasn't that much, of a struggle to go from one to the other. The storyline's a little bit more adult. But as far as the actual details and concepts, you just have to use less words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When you think about writing for that age group, you mentioned less words. Are there certain themes that you find that age group really wants to read or gravitates more towards as opposed to others? Or do you just find that if you've got an idea that you think is really good, the young adults and children will move towards it?
Well, I think the tweeners, which is what they call that genre, they really like the individual against some kind of force. It doesn't necessarily mean adults, but it means they're ready to go fight or stand up for something, and they seem to like the underdog. And I enjoy doing that kind of writing. I mean, I like to put big scenes in books where you have either a big battle or just somebody just smart enough to really outwit the people, the forces that be.
What my favorite book of your children's books, I like all of your books, but my favorite was Crusty, and I love the cover, and we'll put a picture of the cover up on the screen for our audience to see. But I love Crusty, and I love that whole storyline. And we have another character, sort of like in your newest book, Vulture Bend, that is a little bit of an underachiever. So tell us a little bit about sort of who Crusty follows and who it centers around, and how this character is a little bit of an underachiever.
Well, Crusty does not fit into his society. These other crabs, they steal from each other, they're mean, they're greedy, so he decides to go off on his own. He eats these berries, which turns him a different color, like flamingos eat certain kind of shrimp, they turn pink. Well, he turns orange, and now the other crabs in his community really don't trust him because he's changing colors. They don't know what to think about him. So he decides to go off on his own, and he finds a fish that becomes his friend. And there's a little bit more to it than that, but it's kind of him just leaving the people that aren't nice to him and going off and making his own life.
And I really like that, because I think that theme for that age group is so important, that it's okay to be different. It's okay to stand out. It's okay to not to be your own person and kind of and go against the flow. That it's okay. It's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, peer pressures, it can be good and it can be bad, but really, you don't have to put up with it if you don't want to. And I think that was kind of the main message of that book.
I wanted to ask you also about another one of your young adult books, Enki and the Missing Gold. This is really interesting because it has sort of that Grimm's fairy tale. We have a king, we have a castle, we have a mission and a quest that has to be taken, and there's a thief who's doing something to the king. So tell us a little bit about what goes on there in that story.
Well, Enki was everybody thinks he's a wizard, but he's not. There was a spell put on his father that really bounced off his father and came to his son, which was he would shrink to the height of 12 inches and he'd only age 1 year out of every 10. So he's a little guy. He's only a foot tall, and he can go around, and he's kind of the rock star of his era because he can solve all the problems for all the kings or all the noblemen around. So they try to get him, they lure him from one place to another. And finally he's had enough of it. So he kind of goes into hiding for 100 years. He lives in the bottom of an old deserted castle that's crumbled. And they find him because this one king has all his gold at the top of a tower in the castle. And little by little it's disappearing, and nobody can figure out how. So they get Enki. They knew that, there's legends about him being wise and everything. So they get him, they basically kidnap him to come to find out where the gold's going.
Very good. And when I finished that book, I felt like, one of the things I liked about it the most is I could name 5 or 6 people that would love that story, and they all weren't children or young adults. I mean, I knew of some adults and some older adults that would love that story because of the characters and because of that quest that's so much a part of what goes on in the story.
And in that, the 2 Enki books, I try to, if you come across a French town or a French thing that you don't understand, if you Google it, it all goes back to the Knights of the Round Table or the Knights Templar.
Very good.
So it's kind of interactive in that way.
Excellent, very good. I also wanted to ask you about Secret Blood, which is a book that I really enjoyed, and it caught my attention. It was the first book of yours that I read. I want to ask you about the cover, because I think the cover is so interesting. On the cover, we have this billboard against the backdrop of a city, and it's got a figure that sort of resembles Jesus a little bit, and the beard and the long hair, and it says, "He is risen, the walrus." Tell us a little bit about the significance of that picture and why it was put on your cover.
In the story, there is a boy who's been institutionalized his whole life. Strong autism, and those guys kind of have an intelligence to them. And all of a sudden he gets a message in his mind. His life becomes crystal clear, and he leaves the institution he's in. He sneaks out, and he spray paints on anything he can find. And my publisher, Kathy Teets, does all the covers. But she said, try to come up with a drawing that looks like it could be Jesus, but it could be done by an autistic boy. So that was a real challenge. So I came up with that. And during his stay in his institution, the only thing when he would get wound up that would calm him down was Beatles music. So there's Beatles music that runs through the entire book. And any time that he's around, but he's one of the characters that saves everything. There's like a combination of 6 or 7 characters that work, that find each other, and solve kind of the problem that's going on in the book.
Very good. And one of the things I really liked about this book, and really all your books, but especially in Secret Blood, is we really get some insight into people's emotions and hearts, and what kind of motivates people emotionally, kind of their heart, how their heart kind of guides them. Is that something that with this book, with Secret Blood, you set out to do, or is that something that just sort of developed as you were creating the story and composing the characters and that sort of thing?
Well, first of all, it goes back to, in the book, the CIA has cloned Jesus. This happened a long time ago. So, I always try to figure out why people would like to read a book. And for me, it all goes back to, Indiana Jones. When I came out of Indiana Jones, I thought, I don't want this movie to end. I want to go back there. I want to be with those guys. So I thought for most of my books, one of my main goals is to try to make the reader want to hang around with these guys, to really understand them. And when they put the book down, they wish that they could get back in, because that's how I am with a lot of books I read. I want to get right back in that story and leave reality behind. But to do that, I think I have to go in and see how interesting the characters are, and I try to develop them, with that in mind.
One thing I really like about all of your books, too, is you have some great first lines. I think the first lines in a lot of your stories really pull me in. There was one that came out of Secret Blood that I really liked, and I don't remember if this was out of the prologue or out of chapter 1, but you wrote, "The body was taken down gently, much more gently than when it was nailed and hoisted." And from right then, I'm so intrigued in your story. I felt that way about Enki. I felt that way about Crusty. Your first lines in all of your books I'm hooked from that first line. Is that something that you seek out to do as a writer? Is that a stylistic technique you use, or does that just kind of happen with your stories?
Well, first of all, I really appreciate that, because I do work on that. I read a lot of the how-to books, and one of the first things Stephen King says, the first line has to be the most important, and it kind of sets the tone, and it kind of sets, the vocabulary for the whole book and the whole feeling, the heaviness or the lightness of it. And I thought to do that, I had to. My mother-in-law thought for sure we were going to get thrown out of the church with this book. I had to take it first to have people read it before I could go back to church. But I think if I was sincere about, how it was taken down gently, and I think that reader knows that I'm going to be respectful of the subject matter when I do it that way.
Very good. As a writer, Don, who are some writers that influence you or inspire you, or writers that you feel yourself going back to for inspiration or advice as you write?
Well, always Stephen King. He can take, just think about the things he's taken and made them into real stories. Books about vampires have been done forever, but it seems like, with Salem, there's a lot. You were right back there with the vampires. And one of the things I think he said was, a good writer makes something that's unreal. He turns unreality into reality for the reader. And that's one thing that I always try to do. I like Robert B. Parker because he had humor in almost everything. He had the two guys, and I find myself with all the books, they seem to have friendships that start, and they're just kind of guys that start feeding off each other. And even though they may not like each other, they may make fun of each other, you still want to see how they're going to work out things together.
So what is your writing process like? When do you write? How often do you write? And when you get an idea, when you think, I want to write a book on this topic or with this theme, how do you get that whole process started?
The starting for me is the hardest thing. I tend to think in terms of scenes rather than chapters. I really like the small, short chapters because I like the pace that it sets for the whole book. But I look at scenes. What would be a big opening scene. How can you build from that? And you can't have a whole book of big scenes, so I try to put funny or humorous bits in between the big scenes, where either you're developing the character a little bit more, or you're showing something funny that happens to them before you take the next step into that.
Very good. So, with your latest book, Vulture Bend, how long did it take you to get your first draft done? From the time you decided to go forward with it till you at least had your first draft done or first manuscript ready?
It probably was about 4 years. I mean, and that's because I work full time. 2 hours. I can go to the library and maybe get 5 pages in 2 hours, or some nights I'll go and get a paragraph in 2 hours. It depends. I still work on grammar. I still work on how to structure things. I don't want to dangle any participles if I don't have to, if I don't know what I'm doing. So, I basically have an outline, and sometimes for me the parts that are the most fun are the ideas I get when I'm typing, not that I've already planned out.
And I know Headline Books, based in Terra Alta, West Virginia, has been your publisher. How did you get matched up with them, and what's that process been like working with them?
She's been great. Basically, I bugged her to death. I met her at the West Virginia Writers Conference. She was doing a program or presentation, and she made a mistake of giving me her number. And I sent her something the next day, and I called her probably a week, every week, maybe even a little bit less, to say, what can I do? What do you think? We were supposed to meet to discuss it one time. There was a big snowstorm. We didn't get to meet. She didn't get to come, and I was suicidal at that point. And it was just at the point where no one knew it. Probably I didn't even know it myself. But I was finishing up my coaching career, and it was as soon as I signed that contract for that book, I would turn to my resignation for coaching. But I think those had a lot to do with coaching. I mean, I don't think I could have become that if I hadn't been a coach.
Yeah, especially when it comes to like so many of your stories where emotion and how people respond and what drives them. And you see a lot of that, I imagine, with coaching and working with players and athletes. And some are motivated differently. You have to motivate a little more, and some have different goals and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's true that way too. But we started out. We were really good. We were a good team, and I thought I was a good coach. But then my second 10 years or through there, we were just kind of mediocre, and I found myself realizing it wasn't me; it was the players that were good. I was just okay. So when I got the first book done, I think I decided that I didn't know this at the time, but looking back, I could go and create a book and create every little situation, and it was me. I couldn't control whether somebody made a bad pass or ran the wrong offense. So I took that from a world that I couldn't control to a world where I could control every detail.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I feel like that's one of the greatest benefits of writing, because most of us, do other things outside from our writing careers, and it is the one thing we have total control over. Most of us work for someone else, or we report to someone else, or we have a schedule or something that we have to adhere to. But when you're writing, everything on that screen or everything in that notebook or whatever it is that you use to write, you control all of it. You control absolutely every bit of it.
You can say anything you want to anybody.
Exactly. And if you get tired of that character, you can kill them off. That's
exactly right.
If you want those two characters to get together, they can. So I think that's such an excellent point, and I'm glad you mentioned that. I wanted to ask you another question about your books and about Secret Blood, because this book won a lot of awards. Just a couple that it was the winner of the Indie Best Book Awards for Best Spiritual Fiction. It was a winner at the London Book Festival, the Wild Card category. It was also recognized at the International Book Awards. It was a finalist for Best Ebook, and there were several other awards that it was either an honorable mention for or placed in some way. How gratifying is that for you as a writer to have a contest or a set of judges or whatever the criteria are, look at your book and say, we really recognize this as one of the best?
It's very gratifying. I mean, again, it goes back to my publisher, Kathy. She enters them in contests. She doesn't have a large advertising budget, and she thinks that she has a book she thinks is good or worthy. She'll enter them in contests. So most of that comes from her, and it's gratifying that that people like it, but it's also gratifying that you have a publisher that wants to stand behind you and will stand behind your book and put it out there. Because she's really done great things, I mean, for me. All the covers, she pushes me. I think when she says, that's too many pages, you got to get rid of some pages. And I said, how do I know it? She said, you do it, you know. But she's really, you know, there's not a whole lot of publishers around anymore that, you know, you can call up and they'll answer you right then.
Yeah.
And I'm really appreciative of her.
So what is the next thing Don Stansberry is working on? You just got finished with Vulture Bend. Do you have an idea for something else? Are you currently working on something else?
Yeah.
Where are you? What are you working on next?
I got about 50 pages into the next. It will be, I hate to say sequel, but another part of Secret Blood. It'll be some of the same characters. My daughters are saying don't do it because the sequel's never as good. But the publishing company wanted something. They did not really want Vulture Bend. They wanted to go real quick right back with another, and it'll be called Ancient Blood, I think. And it's the same characters. Again, it's something that from the Bible that we may look at a little different after this. But I like to take factual things, put them in a story, and kind of make the story around where, well, maybe that's not exactly the way, you know, or turn it around. It's just fiction. But yeah, that's what I'm working on. Hopefully in a year, something like that.
Very good. Any advice you have for writers who maybe are just getting started with writing, aren't sure that they can do this or want to do this, or maybe that they've got something finished and they're looking for publication? What advice would you give to them as they sort of go through this process? Because you've done it multiple times over now. Any advice or perspective you could offer them?
First of all, I would join the West Virginia Writers Association. They have a big conference every year. There's people. You don't feel like an outsider anymore. I still have trouble telling people that, yeah, I'm an author. Because you don't feel like you should be mentioning yourself with the people that you idolize. You know what I mean? So be able to say it proudly that you've written things. Don't fear going up to people and saying, hey, would you take a look at this? Would you do this? Because I bugged people, you know, and it turned out well with headline books, but other people I bugged, it hasn't turned out well. So, you know, you just knock on doors and you just keep pushing and pushing until something breaks. And, you know, the fact is that, you know, so many, you look at authors around, I think, who is it, Grissom carried his book around for like 2 years at county fairs and places like that trying to sell it until he got his first deal. So, you know, if you keep trying, I think you're going to either wear your welcome out and go someplace else, or it's going to work for you.
Yeah, very good. So, Don Stansberry, in our final moments, if anyone wants to get in contact with you to talk to you about your writing career or your books, or to get copies of your books, how can they get in contact with you, and where can they get copies of your books?
Well, first of all, I'd probably say go to the Headline Books website. You know, that's the best place to get in contact with me. And the books can be ordered off Amazon. They're in bookstores around, but you know, it seems like anymore with the big corporate bookstores, it's hard to get them. When Borders was in Parkersburg, they were really good to us. I mean, they did wonderful things for us. But with some of the others that are there now, it's just tough to get them in the store. They can always order them for you. And then I'm going to be around different places. I go to Tamarack once a month. So they keep the books there. Vulture Bend's not there yet, but it has to be juried. But that and Amazon's probably the best place for me.
Okay, very good. Don Stansberry has been our guest here on Chapters today. We've been talking to him about his award-winning books, among them his latest, Vulture Bend. His other novel includes Secret Blood. He's also got several children's books out, including Enki and the Missing Gold, and Enki, Ogleby, and the Witches. Also Crusty, his other children's book, and we've been glad to talk with him about all of his books and his writing career. So Don, congratulations on all your books out so far. Congratulations on Vulture Bend, and best of luck with you and to you on your sequel to Secret Blood. We thank you for coming on the program.
I really appreciate it. It's been fun.
We also want to take a moment to say thanks to Chris Dargish and the staff at Empire Books and News for providing our on-site support and assistance today. We encourage you to come down to Empire Books and News and pick up copies of Don Stansberry's books. Also, many of the other authors that we've had featured on the program have their works for sale right here at Empire Books and News. So whatever reading taste you have, Empire Books and News can help you get that satisfied right here at the store. And we appreciate all their support of not only this chapter's program, but every chapter's program that you see here on Armstrong Television. And if you'd like to reach out to the program with a question, comment, or story suggestion, we've made that possible to you and for you through a variety of social media platforms. One of those is our email address, and that email address is right here at the bottom of the screen, lp4@zoominternet.net. We do ask that you include your name and the community or town in which you're writing from so that we can keep track of that correspondence. If you like to watch programming on YouTube, Chapters has a Chapters page on the Armstrong One Wire page through YouTube. And that address is right here at the bottom of the screen, youtube.com/Armstrong One Wire. From there, click on the Chapters tab, and you can find all of our programming archived for you there from over 3+ years of author, editor, and publisher interviews right there on the YouTube page through Armstrong One Wire. So we appreciate them setting that up for us, and we know many of you have gone and watched those programs for the second or third time and have shared those on your social media platforms, and we appreciate that. And if you're a user on Facebook, we also have a Chapters page available to you through Facebook. All you need to do is go to facebook.com/Chapters TV Show, or just go to facebook.com and in the search bar type in Chapters TV Show. And from there you can find our more recent author, editor, and publisher interviews archived for you there as well. You can interact and comment with viewers of the program and use the other Facebook functions that are available to you there. So if you like email, you like YouTube, you like Facebook, we've made it possible for you to stay in contact with the program through one of those social media platforms. And we know many of you have done that, and we appreciate that so very much. And that's going to do it for us this time on Chapters, but please come again next time. And in the meantime, stay tuned to this station for news and views that impact you and your community.